The moment you chose to watch this, something already shifted. Not because of what will be said, but because of what you were ready to recognize. This is not information entering you. This is alignment revealing itself. The quantum password is not hidden inside these words. It is activated by your presence, by the precise state you are in right now. Watching is not passive here. It is a crossing. Nothing brought you here by accident. Timing is never random when consciousness is involved. You did not find this video. You met it. And that distinction matters, because recognition always precedes access. The field does not respond to curiosity. It responds to readiness. And readiness is not effort. It is coherence. A quiet internal yes that does not need explanation. The idea of a quantum password has always been misunderstood. People imagine codes, phrases, techniques. But passwords only work when the system recognizes who is entering. Reality works the same way. The field does not open to those who want more. It opens to those who are aligned with what already is. The password is not something you say or do. It is something you are when resistance drops away. Notice how there is nothing you need to figure out right now. No task to complete. No belief to adopt. The unlocking happens in recognition, not in effort. When something resonates, your system knows before your mind does. That knowing is the signal. That signal is what selects you. This is why forcing never works. Force scrambles coherence. Calm recognition sharpens it. You may feel a subtle sense of familiarity as this lands. Not excitement. Not urgency. Familiarity. As if something long known is being remembered rather than learned. That is because the password was never external. It was never missing. It was simply inactive until the moment you matched it. And matching does not require striving. It requires honesty with your current state. Reality mirrors inner state, not words. Emotion is frequency. Frequency is instruction. The field reads that instruction instantly. When the instruction is mixed, access feels delayed. When the instruction is clear, doors appear to open effortlessly. Not because something was granted to you, but because nothing is resisting anymore. This is why not everyone will feel this. And that is not superiority or exclusion. It is resonance. A radio does not judge stations. It receives what it is tuned to. You are not becoming worthy by watching this. You are confirming alignment that already existed. This changes everything, because it removes the idea that you must earn access to your own reality. The quantum password is not a future event. It is not something that will unlock later if you do enough inner work. It is activating now, in proportion to how willing you are to recognize yourself as the source, not the seeker. The moment that recognition stabilizes, reality responds differently. Not symbolically. Literally. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Most people have been conditioned to believe that access comes from effort. That if something matters, it must be chased, disciplined into existence, or earned through strain. This belief feels logical, but it is precisely what keeps the gate closed. Not because effort is wrong, but because effort broadcasts a frequency of lack. And reality does not respond to intention. It responds to resonance. When you try to access something, you imply separation from it. Trying is an admission that you are not already aligned. The field reads that immediately. Not as a punishment, not as rejection, but as a clear signal, this state is not a match. This is why force never produces lasting shifts. It can create motion, but it cannot create coherence. Discipline, when rooted in fear of missing out or fear of not being enough, carries tension. That tension becomes the instruction. And the instruction says, hold distance. Hold delay. Hold friction. The field simply mirrors what is being emitted. This is the quiet law most people miss. You cannot muscle your way into alignment because alignment is not a destination. It is a state. Resonance works differently. Resonance is effortless not because it is weak, but because it is accurate. When something is aligned, it does not push. It settles. It feels obvious. The mind often mistrusts this because it equates ease with laziness. But ease is not absence of power. Ease is absence of resistance. Think of how recognition works in your body. When something is true for you, there is no debate. No internal argument. No convincing required. That is resonance. It does not shout. It does not demand attention. It simply clicks. That click is what opens access. Not because something unlocks externally, but because the internal noise stops interfering. Trying creates static. Effort tightens identity around outcome. And the tighter the grip, the more distorted the signal becomes. This is why people who are constantly striving often feel close but never quite there. They are orbiting alignment without entering it. Always preparing. Always adjusting. Never arriving. Ease, on the other hand, is misunderstood as doing nothing. But ease is not inaction. It is action without internal resistance. It is movement that flows from clarity rather than urgency. When ease is present, there is no sense of chasing. There is a sense of allowing what already matches to meet you. This is why access is granted through resonance. Not because someone decides you deserve it, but because resonance is the only state that can receive without distortion. You cannot receive what you are not tuned to. And tuning does not require effort. It requires honesty. A willingness to stop pretending you are not ready when you are. Or to stop forcing readiness when you are not. The paradox is this: the moment you stop trying to access, access becomes available. Because the signal changes. The broadcast shifts from wanting to matching. From reaching to being. And reality responds instantly to that difference. This is not about giving up. It is about letting go of the wrong lever. Effort belongs in action, not in alignment. Alignment happens when you allow yourself to be where you already are, without tension, without performance, without strain. That state is readable. That state is clear. And clarity is what opens everything. There has never been a moment where you were outside the field, negotiating your way back in. The idea of access implies distance, and distance was never real. What has always existed is an agreement that does not function like a contract, does not require renewal, and cannot be revoked. It is harmonic, not hierarchical. You do not apply to it. You resonate with it. This agreement was not made in time. It was not formed through intention or belief. It exists because consciousness and the field are not separate systems. They are different expressions of the same intelligence. The field is not an external force responding to you. It is you, responding to yourself through form. Once this is seen, the idea of a gatekeeper dissolves completely. Nothing in reality is deciding whether you are worthy of response. There is no authority measuring your progress. There is no test you can fail. The only variable has ever been coherence. When coherence is present, the agreement becomes obvious. When coherence is disrupted, it feels as though something has been lost. But nothing was ever taken. The signal was simply distorted. This is why the agreement feels hidden. Not because it is secret, but because it does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It waits in neutrality, responding precisely to the state you occupy. When your internal state stabilizes, the agreement becomes perceptible again. Not as a thought, but as a felt knowing that you belong to the movement of reality itself. The human tendency is to search for permission. To look for signs, confirmations, rituals that indicate approval. But permission implies separation. And separation is the only illusion here. The field does not grant access. It reflects recognition. When you recognize yourself as part of the system responds without delay. This agreement does not ask you to be perfect. It does not require constant positivity or emotional control. It only responds to honesty. When your internal state is aligned with what you know to be true, the harmony is restored. When you deny your state, perform alignment, or attempt to override yourself, the agreement does not disappear. It simply becomes harder to hear. Remembrance is not dramatic. It does not arrive with fireworks or sudden visions. It arrives quietly, as relief. As a sense of returning to something that never left. That is the signature of this agreement. It does not excite the nervous system. It settles it. It does not add energy. It removes interference. You are not building a relationship with the field. You are remembering one that has always been active. Every moment of ease you have ever felt was the agreement functioning. Every moment where things aligned without force was not luck. It was coherence. Proof that the system has always been responsive to you. Once this is understood, the search for external validation loses its grip. You stop asking whether you are allowed, ready, or chosen. Those questions only arise when the agreement is forgotten. Recognition replaces them effortlessly. And with recognition comes a quiet certainty, nothing needs to be negotiated. The agreement is not something you step into later. It is not a future state. It is operating now, in proportion to how much you allow yourself to acknowledge it. This is not about gaining access. It is about removing the assumption that access was ever missing. Before going further, it is important to understand that nothing mystical is being introduced here. What follows are mechanics, not beliefs. Not concepts to adopt, but laws already operating. Once seen, they cannot be unseen. Everything discussed so far rests on this foundation, because without understanding how the field reads you, recognition remains abstract. Emotion is not a reaction to reality. Emotion is the signal reality responds to. It is not secondary. It is primary. Before thought forms, before language appears, emotion has already instructed the field. This is why emotion cannot be bypassed, affirmed over, or ignored. It is the interface. Every emotional state carries a direction. Expansion or contraction. Expansion feels like ease, openness, relief, clarity. Contraction feels like tension, urgency, heaviness, resistance. These are not good or bad. They are guidance. Expansion indicates alignment with your current truth. Contraction indicates misalignment with it. That is all. No judgment is required. When you feel expanded, your system is coherent. The signal is clean. The field reads it without distortion. When you feel contracted, the signal is fragmented. The field still responds, but it mirrors the fragmentation. This is why forcing positivity during contraction backfires. You are adding noise to an already unclear instruction. Emotion is often misunderstood as something to control. But control is not the solution. Awareness is. The moment you recognize an emotional state without trying to change it, coherence begins to return. Resistance relaxes. Expansion is allowed to emerge naturally. This is not emotional management. It is emotional literacy. The gate does not open because you feel happy. It opens because you are honest. Expansion is not excitement. It is alignment. And alignment feels calm, grounded, settled. Many people confuse intensity with expansion and miss the signal entirely. True expansion is quiet. It does not need validation. Contraction is not failure. It is feedback. It tells you that something about your current focus, identity, or expectation is out of sync. When contraction is resisted, it deepens. When it is allowed, it resolves. The field responds to the allowing, not to the contraction itself. This is why effort does not work at the emotional level. Effort is contraction disguised as discipline. It tightens the system. Allowing loosens it. And a loosened system transmits a clearer signal. The clearer the signal, the more immediate the response. Emotion is not something you fix before reality changes. Emotion is what reality is responding to in real time. There is no delay. There is no buffering period. The field does not wait for you to finish healing or improving. It mirrors exactly what is active now. Once this is understood, you stop trying to bypass how you feel. You stop treating emotion as an obstacle. You begin to see it as navigation. Expansion means continue. Contraction means pause and realign. That simplicity is power. This changes how you relate to your inner world. Instead of demanding constant positivity, you allow honesty to lead. And honesty always produces alignment faster than performance ever could. If this clarification has landed clearly, like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Thought has been given far more authority than it deserves. It is treated as the origin point, the command center, the place where creation begins. But thought is not first. Thought is downstream. It is a translation, not a source. Frequency always precedes it. And because most people try to change reality at the level of thought, they are always working after the signal has already been sent. Before a thought appears, there is a state. A tone. A baseline orientation of being. That orientation is frequency. It is not mystical. It is simply the sum of your emotional coherence, nervous system regulation, and identity stability in the present moment. Thought rises out of that state the way a ripple rises from water. You cannot change the water by rearranging the ripples. This is why affirmations so often fail. Words are precise, but they are slow. By the time language is formed, the frequency has already instructed the field. Repeating new words while holding an old state only amplifies contradiction. The field does not respond to what you say. It responds to what you are resonating as you say it. Language is symbolic. Frequency is literal. Words point. Frequency transmits. When the two are misaligned, frequency wins every time. This is not because words are weak, but because they are representational. They describe reality. They do not generate it. Recognition always happens before language. You feel something land before you can explain it. You know something is true before you can articulate why. That knowing is not vague. It is precise. It is simply nonverbal. The mind often rushes in afterward to label it, claim it, or doubt it. But the recognition itself did not need permission from thought. This is why the deepest shifts often feel quiet. There is no internal monologue announcing change. No dramatic declaration. Just a subtle settling. A sense of alignment returning. When frequency shifts, thought reorganizes automatically. New language becomes available. New perspectives arise without effort. This is the correct order. Trying to think your way into alignment reverses the sequence. It asks the slowest layer to lead. And the result is frustration. You may say the right words while feeling the wrong state. The field responds to the state. Always. This does not mean thought is useless. Thought is an instrument. A translator. It can help refine focus once frequency is stable. But it cannot initiate coherence on its own. When thought is used to override feeling, it creates internal conflict. When thought follows feeling, it becomes elegant. Frequency succeeds because it is what you are emitting continuously, whether you are aware of it or not. You do not turn it on. You do not activate it. You are always broadcasting. Recognition simply brings that broadcast into clarity. This is why listening matters more than repeating. Why noticing matters more than affirming. When you become aware of your frequency, you gain access to real change. Not through control, but through alignment. Once this hierarchy is understood, effort drops. You stop arguing with your inner state. You stop trying to convince reality. You let recognition lead, and language follows naturally. And when that order is restored, things begin to work without explanation. Creation has never been waiting for you in the future. It has never been unlocked by preparation, planning, or becoming ready at some later point. The only place creation responds from is now. Not as a concept, but as a condition. The present moment is not a slice of time. It is the only access point reality recognizes. The idea of future activation is one of the most subtle delays consciousness uses against itself. It sounds responsible. It sounds wise. When I understand more. When I'm more stable. When I'm fully ready. But the field does not respond to intention aimed forward. It responds to state that is active. And state only exists now. Preparation assumes something is missing. That assumption becomes the instruction. The field reads it as postponement. Not because preparation is wrong, but because it broadcasts a frequency of not yet. And not yet can never arrive, because arrival only happens in the present. This is why so many people feel close but stalled. They are always orienting toward alignment instead of occupying it. They are rehearsing readiness instead of recognizing it. And the field mirrors that perfectly by keeping reality just out of reach. The present moment does not reward effort. It responds to coherence. When you are here fully, without narrating, without anticipating, without checking for results, the signal stabilizes. There is no waiting period. No buffering. The response is immediate, even if the form it takes unfolds gradually. This does not mean abandoning action or ignoring responsibility. It means removing time as a condition for permission. The moment you stop telling yourself, soon, the system updates. Not dramatically. Cleanly. Quietly. Notice how recognition only ever happens now. You never realize something yesterday. You never recognize truth tomorrow. Insight lands in the present, or it does not land at all. Creation follows the same rule. It does not schedule itself. It mirrors what is active. Future-oriented activation also creates tension. A subtle pressure to maintain momentum, to keep working towards something invisible. That pressure fragments coherence. And fragmentation weakens the signal. The present moment, by contrast, has no pressure. It only asks for honesty about what is here. When you allow yourself to be here without postponement, something releases. The need to become disappears. You stop asking whether you are ready and begin noticing that readiness is a state, not an achievement. And states are chosen instantly. This is why the present moment feels so unremarkable to the mind. There is nothing to fix. Nothing to improve. Nothing to chase. But to the field, this is clarity. This is when instruction becomes readable. Creation does not respond to desire projected forward. It responds to identity occupied now. When identity stabilizes, outcomes reorganize naturally. Not because you did something right, but because you stopped delaying alignment. There is no final preparation step. No last piece of information required. The door does not open later. It opens when the idea of later dissolves. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Before moving further, a shift in perspective is required. Up to now, recognition has been clarified. Now contrast must be introduced, because contrast is where most signals collapse. This is where people unintentionally work against themselves while believing they are doing everything right. Control feels productive. It feels responsible. But control is interference disguised as intention. Control scrambles the signal because it is rooted in distrust of the present state. The moment you try to control an outcome, you imply that what is happening now is insufficient or unsafe. That implication becomes the broadcast. The field does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you assume is missing. Control always assumes lack. Effort, when driven by urgency, tightens the system. That tightening is not subtle. It constricts perception, narrows possibility, and introduces noise into the signal. You may still be moving. You may still be acting. But coherence is reduced. And when coherence drops, responsiveness fragments. This is why so many disciplined people feel exhausted without results. Their actions are clean, but their internal state is tense. The tension is the instruction. The field mirrors tension with delay, resistance, or complexity. Not as punishment. As reflection. Control also fractures timing. Instead of moving with what is available, it pushes against what is. That push creates drag. You feel like you are constantly correcting, adjusting, compensating. The signal never stabilizes long enough for the field to respond cleanly. Everything feels close but unstable. There is a difference between intention and control. Intention is directional without force. Control is directional with pressure. Pressure distorts frequency. It creates spikes and drops instead of a steady transmission. The field responds best to stable signals, not intense ones. Contrast exists to reveal this. When things do not move despite effort, it is not because you need more force. It is because force is the interference. Contrast highlights misalignment without accusation. It shows you where you are gripping instead of allowing. Most people misread contrast as a sign to try harder. This compounds the problem. More control increases noise. More noise reduces clarity. And clarity is what allows response. This loop can continue indefinitely until recognition interrupts it. Letting go of control does not mean abandoning direction. It means releasing the internal tension attached to outcome. Action taken from calm certainty transmits differently than action taken from urgency. One stabilizes the signal. The other destabilizes it. Control also collapses trust in timing. When you attempt to manage every variable, you assume the field is unreliable. That assumption becomes the instruction. And reality mirrors unreliability. Things feel inconsistent, unpredictable, fragile. When control relaxes, something unexpected happens. The system recalibrates. Not instantly in form, but immediately in tone. The noise drops. The signal smooths. And from that smoothness, movement becomes efficient again. This is not about doing less. It is about removing strain from doing. The moment effort becomes performative, coherence breaks. The moment effort becomes natural expression, coherence returns. Contrast is not opposition. It is feedback. It shows you where control has replaced trust. Where force has replaced alignment. And once that is seen, control loosens without effort. The signal clears on its own. This is the turning point. Because from here, power is no longer associated with pressure. It becomes associated with precision. And precision only exists where control has been released. Resistance is often misunderstood as a sign that something is wrong. As if friction means failure, or discomfort means misdirection. But resistance is not an obstacle placed in your way. It is information arising within alignment itself. Contrast exists for refinement, not punishment. It sharpens the signal by revealing what is not coherent with who you are becoming aware of being. When resistance appears, it is not asking to be fought. It is asking to be read. The moment you label discomfort as a problem, you distort its message. Contrast is precise. It shows you where identity is still diffused, where assumptions are outdated, where internal signals are mixed. Without contrast, coherence could not sharpen. Everything would remain vague. Discomfort narrows focus. It brings attention to edges. Just as clarity emerges through differentiation, alignment deepens through contrast. You do not know what is true for you until something highlights what is not. This is not opposition. It is definition. Many people try to eliminate resistance as quickly as possible. They rush to soothe, bypass, or override it. In doing so, they miss its function. Resistance is a mirror held close. It reflects subtle misalignments that comfort cannot reveal. When read accurately, it accelerates clarity rather than delaying it. Contrast also refines identity. Each moment of friction exposes a boundary, a preference, a truth that has not yet been fully acknowledged. Identity becomes sharper not through affirmation, but through discernment. Through noticing what does not fit and allowing that information to reorganize self-definition. This is why growth often feels uncomfortable before it feels stable. Not because something is breaking, but because something is being clarified. Old assumptions surface. Habitual patterns reveal their limits. This exposure is not chaos. It is precision at work. Resistance does not demand immediate action. It demands attention. When you give it space without interpretation, it communicates clearly. The signal strengthens. Confusion dissipates. What once felt like obstruction becomes orientation. Contrast also prevents stagnation. Without it, identity would calcify. There would be no feedback to indicate misalignment. Discomfort keeps the system responsive. It ensures that coherence remains dynamic rather than rigid. This reframing changes everything. Instead of bracing against resistance, you begin to listen. Instead of reacting, you observe. And observation alone sharpens clarity. The more accurately you read contrast, the less intense it needs to be. The system learns quickly when it is not being ignored. It is important to see that contrast is not emotional turmoil. It is not chaos. It is subtle unease, tension, or dissatisfaction pointing toward refinement. When recognized, it does not escalate. It resolves by being acknowledged. This does not require fixing or changing anything yet. It requires understanding. Contrast belongs to the process of recognition. It prepares the ground for coherence by removing ambiguity. Once this is understood, resistance loses its threat. Discomfort is no longer a signal to stop, nor a signal to push harder. It becomes a calibrator. A fine-tuning mechanism that keeps identity aligned with truth. Contrast sharpens the signal so that when movement happens, it is clean. Not rushed. Not reactive. Precise. Power has been misdefined for a long time. It has been associated with force, dominance, intensity, and control. With pushing harder, holding tighter, and proving strength through strain. But none of those transmit clarity. True power is not loud. It is stable. And stability comes from relaxed certainty, not pressure. Allowing is often mistaken for weakness because it does not look like effort. But allowing is not passive. It is precise. It is the state where resistance has been removed without abandoning direction. When allowing is present, action still happens, but it happens without internal friction. That absence of friction is what makes it powerful. Struggle collapses not when you stop caring, but when you stop fighting the present state. The fight itself is what drains energy. The moment resistance to what is loosens, coherence returns. And with coherence, power becomes available again. Not as adrenaline, but as steadiness. Relaxed certainty is not confidence in an outcome. It is confidence in alignment. It does not need reassurance. It does not scan for signs. It does not rush to secure results. It rests in the knowing that when the signal is clear, response is inevitable. This certainty is calm because it is not trying to convince anything. Allowing refines precision because it removes distortion. When you are no longer bracing, compensating, or overcorrecting, your signal becomes clean. Clean signals do not need force. They carry their own authority. Reality responds to them naturally. This is why struggle feels exhausting and ineffective. It requires constant maintenance. You must keep pushing to sustain it. Allowing, by contrast, sustains itself. Once resistance drops, coherence holds without effort. The system no longer leaks energy through tension. It is important to distinguish allowing from waiting. Waiting implies delay and expectation. Allowing implies presence and readiness. Waiting leans forward. Allowing stands still. One is strained. The other is grounded. Power expressed through allowing feels almost invisible. There is no drama. No inner dialogue announcing strength. Just a sense of rightness. Of being exactly where you are without needing to justify it. From that state, movement becomes efficient. Decisions simplify. Action aligns. This does not mean you stop acting. It means action is no longer fueled by urgency. Urgency distorts timing. It rushes processes that require stability. When urgency dissolves, timing recalibrates. Things unfold with fewer corrections. Allowing also dissolves the need to manage perception. You stop trying to appear aligned and simply are. That authenticity strengthens the signal. The field responds more clearly to authenticity than to effortful performance. When allowing is present, there is nothing to prove. And without something to prove, there is no strain. Without strain, coherence stabilizes. And when coherence stabilizes, power becomes effortless. This is the paradox most miss. The more you relax into alignment, the more effective you become. Not because you are doing more, but because you are no longer interfering. Allowing is the highest form of power because it trusts the signal. It trusts clarity. It trusts that when resistance is removed, movement does not need to be forced. Struggle ends not through victory, but through irrelevance. Once allowing is understood, struggle simply has no role. And what remains is a quiet, precise strength that does not need to announce itself to be real. Before moving forward, it is necessary to loosen the way timelines are usually understood. Most people imagine timelines as rewards waiting at the end of effort, or as paths unlocked through correct behavior. That framing turns reality into a hierarchy and consciousness into a competitor. What follows is not a theory, but a clarification of how selection actually occurs. Timelines are not earned. They are not granted. They are not achieved through improvement or struggle. Timelines are reflections. They are the natural environments that match the coherence you are occupying. Just as a radio does not earn a station but receives the one it is tuned to, consciousness does not climb into timelines. It aligns with them. Coherence is the only selector. Not morality. Not effort. Not discipline. The field does not track how hard you try. It mirrors how stable your signal is. When coherence shifts, the reflected environment shifts with it. This is not delayed. It is immediate at the level of alignment, even if form reorganizes gradually. This is why people can work tirelessly and feel stuck, while others seem to move effortlessly. It is not fairness or luck. It is resonance. Effort without coherence produces motion without relocation. You stay in the same timeline, repeating patterns with different details. Coherence relocates you without force. A timeline is not a future destination. It is a version of reality that exists now as a potential. When your internal state matches its frequency, awareness naturally experiences it. Nothing travels. Nothing jumps. Selection is perceptual, not physical. This also means you are not punished for incoherence. You are simply mirrored. If your internal state is fragmented, reality reflects fragmentation. If your state is stable, reality reflects stability. There is no judgment in this process. Only precision. Trying to earn a better timeline introduces tension. That tension becomes part of the signal, selecting timelines where striving continues. This is how people trap themselves in improvement loops. Always upgrading, never arriving. Not because arrival is impossible, but because striving broadcasts non-arrival. When coherence deepens, effort drops away naturally. Not as a decision, but as a consequence. The need to prove, secure, or optimize fades. Identity stabilizes. And as identity stabilizes, the environment reorganizes to match it. Timelines do not respond to desire. Desire is movement. Timelines respond to being. Being is static enough to be readable. This is why quiet certainty is so powerful. It selects without noise. It is important to see that no timeline is better in an absolute sense. They are simply different reflections. What changes is not value, but fit. When fit improves, friction decreases. Life feels smoother not because obstacles vanish, but because you are no longer misaligned with your own trajectory. Once this is understood, the obsession with getting to a better life dissolves. You stop chasing versions of yourself. You inhabit one. And that inhabiting does the selecting for you. You are not moving through timelines. Timelines are reorganizing around your coherence. This is not a metaphor. It is how reflection works. The moment effort is removed from selection, movement becomes natural. You are not earning a future. You are aligning with what already matches. An alignment, once stabilized, has no alternative but to be reflected. Identity is the command the field responds to, whether you are aware of it or not. Not desire. Not intention. Not what you want to experience. Identity determines what is available to you automatically. Desire moves within identity. Identity defines the range. Most people attempt to change experience by amplifying desire. They focus on outcomes, visualize results, repeat intentions. But desire without identity alignment produces tension. It creates movement without relocation. You may feel motivated, but the environment remains familiar. This is because the field does not reorganize around what you want. It reorganizes around who you are being. Identity is not a label or a story. It is the stabilized sense of self you occupy without effort. It is what feels normal, expected, unquestioned. That baseline broadcasts continuously. And because it is stable, it is readable. The field responds to stability far more reliably than intensity. This is why short bursts of motivation rarely create lasting change. Motivation spikes, then collapses. Identity remains unchanged. The signal fluctuates, but the baseline stays the same. Reality mirrors the baseline. When identity shifts, desire becomes secondary. You no longer need to chase outcomes because the environment begins to match you. Things that once felt distant feel ordinary. Opportunities that required effort begin to appear without force. This is not because you became more deserving. It is because you became more defined. Self-definition matters more than wanting. If you define yourself as someone in transition, reality reflects transition. If you define yourself as someone preparing, reality reflects preparation. If you define yourself as someone stabilizing, reality reflects stability. These definitions are rarely verbal. They are emotional and somatic. They live in what you expect without thinking. Stability is the key here. Identity that fluctuates cannot command consistently. The field mirrors inconsistency with mixed results. Identity that is calm and settled commands without effort. Not because it demands, but because it is clear. This is also why trying to adopt a new identity through force fails. Performance is unstable. It requires maintenance. The field detects the strain. Authentic identity does not need reinforcement. It feels neutral. Normal. Obvious. You do not select experience by declaring who you want to be. You select experience by noticing who you already assume yourself to be and allowing that assumption to update honestly. When identity shifts naturally, desire aligns automatically. There is no internal conflict. This removes pressure from wanting. Desire becomes informative rather than directive. It shows you where identity is stretching, not where it is lacking. When identity catches up, desire quiets. The field responds to who you are being, not who you are trying to become. Trying implies distance. Being implies presence. Presence is stable enough to reflect. This is why recognition is so powerful. When you recognize yourself differently, identity updates without effort. And when identity updates, experience reorganizes without struggle. You are not commanding reality with will. You are commanding it with coherence. Identity is coherence held over time. The more relaxed and stable it is, the more precisely reality mirrors it. Once this is understood, effort moves to the background. You stop pushing desire uphill and begin inhabiting definition. And from that inhabiting, experience follows naturally, because it has no alternative. Identity is the lever. Everything else is response. The field does not wait. It does not hesitate, evaluate, or negotiate. It responds immediately and neutrally to the state you are occupying. Not to your plans. Not to your explanations. Not to your hopes. It mirrors being state with exact precision, without commentary. This is often misunderstood because the form of the response does not always appear instantly. But the alignment shift happens the moment your state stabilizes. The delay people perceive is not the field waiting. It is reality reorganizing through layers of form. The mirror has already moved. The reflection is catching up. The field has no preference. It does not reward positivity or punish doubt. It does not care about deserving or readiness. Those are human overlays. The field only reads coherence. And coherence is simply how consistently you are being what you are being. Consistency is clarity. Clarity is readable. This neutrality is what dissolves waiting. Waiting implies that something is undecided. That approval is pending. That a response has not yet been given. But the response is always given. Instantly. The only thing that changes is whether you recognize it. Hope also dissolves here. Hope is future-oriented. It assumes a gap between now and what is wanted. That assumption becomes part of the signal. And the field mirrors it with continued distance. Not to deny you, but to reflect the state accurately. When you stop hoping, something unexpected happens. The need for reassurance drops away. You are no longer scanning reality for signs. You are no longer measuring progress. The signal stabilizes because attention stops oscillating. And with stability, responsiveness becomes cleaner. The field responds to who you are being, not to what you are waiting for. Being is present. Waiting is deferred. Hope is conditional. Presence is unconditional. The field reflects unconditional states more efficiently because they do not fluctuate. Judgment also disappears in this understanding. There is no good state or bad state from the field's perspective. There is only accurate reflection. If your experience feels stuck, it is not because you are doing something wrong. It is because the being state is still broadcasting stasis. When being shifts, movement follows. This is why trying to convince yourself you are aligned does not work. Convincing is effort. Effort implies doubt. Doubt fragments the signal. The field reflects fragmentation with inconsistency. Recognition, by contrast, settles the system. Nothing needs to be added. Immediacy does not mean impatience. It means honesty. The field mirrors what is honest now. When you allow yourself to be exactly where you are without narrating it, the signal becomes clean. And clean signals move reality efficiently. There is no queue. No waiting list. No process being completed behind the scenes. The response is already active. The question is not when it will arrive. The question is whether your state is stable enough to recognize it. Once this is seen, the habit of waiting loses its logic. You stop positioning yourself as someone awaiting response and begin occupying yourself as the response itself. And when that happens, the mirror has no choice but to reflect it. The field does not delay. It does not judge. It does not withhold. It reflects. Always. The moment you stop asking it to do something later, it shows you what has already been happening now. Before this point, language has been used carefully, but it has still pointed in one direction, towards something called the field. Now that direction must dissolve. What follows is not a new concept, but a remembrance. A quiet inversion that changes how everything previously described is understood. You were never accessing the field. Access implies distance. A subject moving toward an object. A seeker approaching something external. That structure was useful for orientation, but it was never true. Consciousness does not reach into reality. Reality is how consciousness experiences itself when form appears. The field is not outside you, responding to you from a distance. It is not a mechanism you interact with. It is the pattern consciousness takes when it expresses. When this is recognized, the idea of unlocking collapses. Nothing opens. Nothing closes. Separation dissolves. All the language about signals, mirrors, and response was pointing toward this recognition. Not that you are sending something out and waiting for it to return, but that there was never an out or a back. There has only ever been movement within the same awareness. When consciousness forgets itself, experience feels fragmented. Subject here. World there. Cause here. Effect later. When consciousness recognizes itself, that fragmentation relaxes. The loop closes. Experience becomes immediate, intimate, self-referential. This is why recognition feels like relief rather than achievement. You are not gaining something. You are dropping an assumption. The assumption of distance. The assumption of effort. The assumption of a gate that needed to be opened. The field was a name for how consciousness behaves when it appears as structure. As environment. As circumstance. But it was never separate from the one perceiving it. The moment that separation is questioned honestly, it collapses on its own. You are not inside reality trying to influence it. Reality is inside consciousness as experience. This is not philosophy. It is observable. Every sensation, thought, perception appears within awareness. None of them exist outside it. The same is true of the so-called field. Once this is seen, the question of access becomes irrelevant. You cannot access what you are. You can only forget or remember. And forgetting is not a mistake. It is part of how experience unfolds. Remembering is not an achievement. It is a return. This does not erase individuality or function. You still act. You still choose. You still move. But the effort to control drops away because the illusion of separation is no longer driving it. Action becomes expression instead of manipulation. Recognition here is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not claim enlightenment. It simply notices that the one who was trying to align with the field is the same awareness the field was made of. The loop completes. Nothing needs to change after this. There is no instruction to follow. No practice to maintain. This is not a new state to hold on to. It is a clarification that was always available. You were never accessing the field. You were recognizing yourself through it. And that recognition does not end experience. It ends the misunderstanding that experience was happening somewhere else. The search only exists while something feels missing. Questions arise not because answers are unavailable, but because clarity has not yet settled. Seeking is not a flaw. It is a phase consciousness moves through when it is oriented towards something it believes is elsewhere. But when recognition stabilizes, the orientation changes. And with that change, the search dissolves on its own. This ending does not come with a final answer. It comes with silence. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of urgency. Questions lose their charge. Not because they were resolved intellectually, but because the tension that generated them is no longer present. Curiosity softens. Inquiry relaxes. The need to know becomes unnecessary. Most people imagine the end of seeking as attainment. As arrival at a conclusion so complete that nothing more is needed. But recognition does not complete the mind. It quiets it. The loop closes not through accumulation, but through release. The questions simply stop asking themselves. This is why clarity feels different from understanding. Understanding adds content. Clarity removes friction. When clarity arrives, there is no sense of, now I know. There is only a sense of, this is enough. Enough not as resignation, but as fullness. The mind often resists this moment. It expects a reward. A declaration. A new role to inhabit. But recognition does not offer identity. It removes the need for one. The seeker dissolves because the premise of seeking no longer holds. This does not mean thought disappears. Thoughts continue. Ideas still form. But they are no longer charged with the responsibility of finding truth. They become tools rather than pursuits. They move freely without dragging the system forward or backward. Clarity also ends comparison. There is no longer a sense of being behind or ahead. No measuring of progress. No subtle anxiety about missing something essential. The sense of orientation relaxes. Experience unfolds without being monitored. The most telling sign that the search has ended is simplicity. Nothing feels urgent. Nothing feels withheld. There is no impulse to optimize awareness or secure alignment. You are no longer trying to arrive somewhere else. You are simply here, without effort. This does not produce stagnation. It produces fluidity. Movement still happens, but it is no longer driven by lack. Action arises naturally, without being framed as improvement. Life continues, but the pressure to extract meaning from every moment disappears. Recognition does not close the door on mystery. It removes the need to chase it. Mystery remains as texture, not as problem. Wonder remains without hunger. Curiosity remains without anxiety. There are no next steps after this because steps imply distance. There is nothing to reach. Nothing to integrate. Nothing to maintain. Clarity is self-sustaining because it does not require effort to hold. The search was never wrong. It simply had an endpoint. And that endpoint was not an answer waiting at the end of effort. It was the realization that nothing was missing from the beginning. When recognition lands fully, the question, what now, does not arise. Not because the future is known, but because the present is complete. And in that completeness, seeking has no function. The loop closes quietly. And what remains is not certainty, but ease. Not conclusion, but presence. There was never a gate. There was never a sequence you needed to complete. There was never a process unfolding in the background waiting for you to become someone else. The idea of a password was always symbolic, a way of pointing attention back to the only place recognition could occur. And now that recognition has had time to settle, the inversion becomes clear. The password was never something you were meant to discover. It was never hidden. It was never external. The password was you, recognizing yourself without distortion. Not as a person trying to influence reality, but as the awareness through which reality is appearing. Everything you have heard up to this point was not designed to add information. It was designed to remove interference. To loosen assumptions. To quiet effort. To allow recognition to surface naturally. Watching was never about receiving knowledge. It was about creating the conditions where remembering could happen. This moment was not caused by the video. It was revealed through it. The timing was not accidental. But neither was it earned. You did not arrive here by effort or merit. You arrived here by coherence. By being ready to stop seeking something outside yourself. There was never a door to open because there was never a separation that required entry. The feeling of being locked out was a misinterpretation, not a reality. The moment that misinterpretation relaxes, access appears to have been granted. But nothing actually changes. Only perception does. Recognition is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as final or complete. It feels simple. Obvious. Almost anticlimactic. That is how you know it is real. Anything that requires reinforcement or excitement is still effort-based. Recognition rests without needing to be held. Watching this did not activate a future outcome. It clarified a present state. And from that clarification, reality reorganizes naturally. Not because you did something, but because something stopped being done. The effort to unlock. The effort to control. The effort to become. This is why there is nothing to maintain after this. No technique to repeat. No practice to keep alive. No alignment to protect. What has been recognized cannot be unrecognized. It does not depend on mood or circumstance. It is structural, not emotional. You do not need to convince yourself that something shifted. You will notice it indirectly. In how little you need to explain. In how unnecessary urgency feels. In how decisions simplify. In how the need to prove or optimize fades. The password was never meant to be used. It was meant to dissolve. Because passwords only exist where access is restricted. And access was never restricted. Only misperceived. This was not a teaching. It was a mirror. And what it reflected was already present. Watching did not give you anything. It removed what was in the way. There is nothing to take from this forward except presence. Not as a practice. As a fact. The recognition that you are not moving toward reality. Reality is appearing within you. And when that is seen clearly, the idea of unlocking becomes irrelevant. The system resolves itself. Share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.